everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're doing like a full circle thing here. We're gonna make something that was one of the first things I made on the channel, but this one is a little bit chicer, a little bit fancier. Today, we're gonna be making the hipster pouch from Kandou patterns. So if you've been around from the beginning, you know that I did a fanny pack tutorial right when I started my channel. I love fanny packs. Now, I'm going to try not to say that word too many times because today's pattern does come from Caroline over at Kandou Patterns, and she is from England, where the term fanny has a much different meaning than it does here in the US. So we're going to call it the hipster pouch, also known as a bum bag. Let me just show this to you. This is my first version. It is so cute. You guys know how much I am loving this neon pastel vinyl that glows in the dark. And the color blocking. Color blocking is just like, it's one of the easiest things to do, and it's so fun. So this is the hipster pouch. Now, we got a lot going on. It's more than your basic, I'm gonna say it one more time, it's more than your basic fanny. It's slimmer, so it doesn't stick out quite as far as the more traditional hipster bags do. On the front, we have a little tiny zipper right here. We have a large zipper, just like that, with an extending lid that pops up. Inside, we have a lining zipper. On the back, we have a zipper. I know, a lot of zippers, which is great. And this is big enough to hold your phone. You can see we're working with a little bit of pleats here, which help give it that nice rounded shape. On the sides, we have these little holders, and I will be making the version today that has a buckle strap. So you could also make one where you have like D-rings over here and little swivel hooks and clips, you know what I mean? But we're not gonna be doing that. Today we're gonna be making the sewn-in buckle strap. So this is such a fun little pouch to make. It comes together easily. You're gonna love it. It comes in two sizes. There's a size medium, which is this size right here. There's also the size large. Now, I have not made the size large, and we're also gonna be making the size medium today in the tutorial. I just feel like, for me personally, this is a great, great size. I don't need it any bigger than this, but I do encourage you, if you're looking for a bigger version, try out the large. Now, I'm gonna show you this on. All right, let me get my step stool. Now, traditional way to wear this is, doesn't that look so good? And with my shirt, I know. Now, I used, let's see, I don't know if I can tighten this anymore. I used the recommended length of the webbing, and it is a little big on me. So just slightly. I mean, I could just shorten it a little bit because this is as tight as I can get it. So it's a little big on me. So that's one thing you have to think about when you're building this is your waist size or the waist size of the person you're going to be giving to, if they're going to be wearing it like this. Now, so this is one way to wear it. It looks so good. But the trendier way that a lot of people are wearing it right now is across the body. So let's try that. Just slip it over like a crossbody. Oh yeah, doesn't that look cool? I can step down for that. Doesn't that look awesome? I know. But bam, take out my phone, take out my chopstick, take out my shades. Oh, I love this. I love this pouch so much. So thank you as always to Caroline over at Kandou Patterns for allowing me to use your patterns in my tutorial. This little waist bag is such a popular design right now. I have seen so many versions of the fanny pack because it's coming back. Everyone's wearing them again, which personally I love because I think that they're great. But I do love that there are slimmer, chicer versions. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section. As always, there will be timestamps. They will be listed right along the bottom of the screen. Or if you click this little arrow over here, it'll expand the description. And that's where you'll find links for all the timestamps, as well as links for all the material used, all my tools, things like that. If there's anything that I mentioned that I don't have linked and you need the link, just leave a comment down below and I'll get it for you. All right, guys, let's get started. So for this pattern, you're going to need about 1/3 of a yard of exterior material if you're making the medium size. If you're making the larger size, you're going to need more of everything. So just make sure you check the pattern. But exterior material, I'm using two different pieces here, and I'm using vinyl. This vinyl is a little bit thicker and it glows in the dark, which is so fun. This is a much more lightweight vinyl. I would even say close to like quilt cotton lightweight, but I don't need to interface it because it has this nice backing on the back. It doesn't stretch, it doesn't fray, it doesn't require any interfacing. So I've said it before, but if you're looking to start working with vinyl but you're not quite ready and you have experience using quilt cotton, I would go with this one. And then for the lining, you're going to need about 1/2 yard of material. I'm using a lightweight waterproof, this water resistant canvas. This is fantastic, again, if you're a beginner and you want to work with waterproof canvas. But the OtterTex waterproof canvas can be pretty stiff, pretty thick. This water-resistant canvas from Wonderground Fabrics is perfect to get you started. So because I'm using vinyl and water-resistant canvas, I don't actually need any interfacing. If I wanted to add some fusible fleece to make it more squishy, or if I wanted to add some Decovil Light to kind of beef it up and firm it up, I definitely could. However, I think with a waist bag like this, having it a little loose is nice. So I'm not gonna add any interfacing today. Here is our hardware. You're gonna need about 37 inches of zipper tape. So I do suggest you just get yourself 2 or 3 yards of zipper tape so you can cut this down as you go. You're gonna need number 5 zipper tape, and there are 4 zippers in this pattern. We got a lot of pockets, which is good. So I have 4 zipper pulls here to go with my zipper tape. For my waist strap, or honestly, I've been wearing my fanny packs as like a crossbody lately. So for the strap, I'm gonna be using this 1-inch wide webbing. The pattern does call for 1 1/4 inch wide strap and hardware for the medium size. However, I don't have 1 1/4 inch size hardware, so I'm just gonna use what I have. I suggest you do the same. So this is 1-inch wide webbing. This is like seatbelt webbing. And then I have a 1-inch wide slider, and then a 1-inch wide buckle. Now this is really cool because it's a metal buckle. A lot of times these buckles are plastic. If you want to use a plastic buckle, go for it. But this is a fun metal one. It just makes it look a little fancy. And then I have some rivets. These are medium-sized rivets, so they're 9 millimeters around the top and then 8 millimeters tall. And then I have my bag tag as always. So here's pretty much all the other stuff. Scissors, I just use these Kai scissors, and then snips for the machine. Marking tools, you'll want to have marking tools for whatever you're using. So if you have a darker fabric, a chalk marking tool is great for that. If you have a vinyl or a leather, this leather marking tool is fantastic. Anything else, an air erasing marker is going to be perfect. For working on the curves and everything like that, I do like to have a stiletto by the machine, and then I also have a stiletto seam ripper at my table. I do require a turning tool for this because those little edges that hold the strap on, you do have to poke out some corners. I do not recommend you use that purple thing. Don't use anything too sharp because you will rip those corners. So this turning tool right here is my favorite. I'll have a link for it down below. A lighter, as always, to help clean up the edges. Double-sided tape for the zippers. I'm using a Tex 45 weight thread. In the bobbin, I'm using this Gutermann thread from Joann's. My needles today are Microtex 8012. If you're using a thicker material, go with the 9014. However, you do have a lot of seams coming together here, so I do suggest you try to keep it to a medium to lightweight material for this bag. A 1-inch by 6-inch ruler as always, and then my rivet press. Okay, so let's go over our pattern pieces. First, we have pattern piece A, which is that front center pocket, like the bottom part of the pocket. So if you have a print here that you really want to showcase, this is where you're going to do that. That's where I'm using this vinyl. This vinyl is my more medium weight vinyl, and it's going to make it a little bit easier to sew. So if you have like a thicker vinyl and you don't want the whole pouch to be like that because it's going to be difficult to sew, just use it on this front pocket. Next, we have the lining for that front pocket. So this is my waterproof canvas, just 1 cut of that. And then we have our exterior side pieces. So you see it's going to be like that. Very cute. Don't put away this pattern piece because we will be using it to mark placement for our pleats. So keep an eye on that. I wanted to mention I also have this small scrap here. This is for the little D-ring. You know, I forgot to include that in hardware. So this is completely optional, but you can add a cute little D-ring to the front of the pouch, which I'm actually gonna be using to clip my sanitizer to. I always like to have hand sanitizer hanging from my bag so it's easy to access. And this is what I'm using for that. So you're gonna have a small scrap of material, and for this pattern, it's a 3/4 inch D-ring. So that's gonna be for that. Next, we have the front panel lining, which is pattern piece D. I know all this needs to be ironed. And then we have the zipper strip, which is pattern piece E. And with the zipper strip, you're actually gonna be cutting this in half to create 2 different zipper strips, one below and above the main zipper. There is this cut line for zipper seam. I'm not quite sure what that's for. If you catch it in the pattern, let me know, because I went through the pattern a couple times and I couldn't quite see what that cut line for zipper seam is. So I don't cut anything smaller. I just cut this piece in half when we get to it, just so you know. Also, don't forget pattern piece D does have your pleat marks, so don't lose this pattern. You're gonna need it. Pattern pieces F and G are for the top panel, so you have your top panel exterior and then your top panel lining. Pattern pieces H and I are for the strap connectors, and these are not the same size. Pattern piece I is a little bit longer than pattern piece H, so make sure you remember that. And then finally, we have pattern pieces J and K. J is the back panel, so you're gonna have 1 exterior piece and 1 lining piece. And pattern piece K is the lining material for the zipper pockets. Since we have 2 recessed zippers, you're gonna have 4 panels here, 2 for each pocket. Okay, to get started, you're gonna need your panel A and your lining B, and we're gonna create that fun little zipper pockets. You're gonna also need some zipper tape. Now, you can pre-cut all your zipper tape so that it's the exact size it needs to be. I always like my zipper tape to be a little longer. It's not really necessary. It just makes me feel like I've got some room for error. So make sure you also grab your zipper pull and put it on your zipper tape. Okay, so with your panel A, right side up, take your zipper tape, and I like my zipper to close towards the left, so I have it so that when it's closing, it's going towards the left side. And lay your zipper right side down against the right side of your exterior panel. Grab some clips and clip this together. Now I'm gonna go baste this in place at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to make sure it doesn't wiggle around when I put the lining on. So now that I have that basted, now I'm gonna take my lining panel B and I'm gonna lay that right side down against the back side of my zipper. And since my zipper tape's a little bit longer, I'm just gonna make sure I'm matching it up with the edge of my exterior panel A. And I'm gonna clip right along that edge that I just basted my zipper to. And you could do this in one step. You don't need to baste your zipper down. I just get clumsy, so it's better for me. All right, now I'm gonna sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have these sewn together, flip your lining and exterior wrong sides together. If you're using quilt cotton here, you can iron this, but if you're using a vinyl, you don't really wanna touch the vinyl with your iron. So I just flatten it out with my fingers, and then I clip on the side to hold it in place so it doesn't move around too much. You can also press this from the water resistant side right here if you'd like. Just make sure you're pressing the right side of the material. So now let's take this to the sewing machine and top stitch right along the exterior at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So because I got a little close with my zipper over here on the edge of my zipper tape, I decided to just stitch down the edges. If you cut your zipper tape to the suggested size in the pattern, then it also suggests you stitch down the ends so that you don't have this happening. So now let's flip over our unit. So we're looking at the lining side, and we're gonna flip our lining up to the other side of the zipper tape. Just make sure it's lining up with the edges here, especially if your zipper tape is still longer than it needs to be. Just square it up with the edges, and then just clip it to the top of your zipper tape. All right, now let's baste that down at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now I'm gonna trim my zipper tape down so it's the same length as my panel. There we go. And I like to just kind of line up my scissors right along the edge of the material and just trim the tape down. So cute. So now I'm going to add my bag tag a little bit lower down. I got this cute little fairy here, so I wanna attach it a little bit lower down. First, I'm gonna find the midpoints though. So I'm going to find the midpoint on the top edge of my zipper tape by just folding it in half. And I make the teeniest, tiniest little cut right on that fold, just so I have mark. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, just folding the bottom panel in half, pinching at that fold, and then clipping. There we go. So now I can use my ruler, and let's see, I think I'm going to measure about 1 inch up. I think that should be okay, because I have this design right here, so I don't want to lose it. So I'm going to measure 1 inch up and center my tag so that it's just like that, a little bit lower. On the last one, I made it a little bit higher. Put it wherever you want. You don't even have to put anything on here at all. You can wait and put it on the back panel. You can put it inside the bag. Just take time to think about where you want to put a tag if you have one. I'm just going to grab a double-sided tape and apply it to the back. There we go. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch around all 4 edges. I'm going to move my lining pocket out of the way though. We don't want to stitch through the lining, so just the exterior right now. And as you can see, I left the top thread and the bobbin threads really long, and I did not back stitch. That's just a personal choice, but what I'm going to do is on the back, I'm going to pull on those bobbin threads, and I'm going to pull the top thread loop up to the back. Do this for both of them. All right, so all 4 threads should be on the back side, and on the front side it looks nice because you can't really tell where you started and stopped your stitching. And then I'm just going to double up the threads and triple knot them. And just make sure you cut down the long tails. Okay, now I'm gonna lay it as flat as I can get it, and I'm going to apply clips to the side. If you're using quilt cotton, once again, you can press it with an iron to flatten it out. Just make sure you're getting all the material. And now we're going to just baste along the two sides at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and that's going to keep this nice and flat and keep the lining pocket down. All right, you can put this to the side for just a moment. Now you're going to grab your pattern piece C, and you're going to flip your panels over so you're working on the wrong side. And then taking your pattern piece, you're going to lay it over one of the side pieces, just like that. I already poked a hole through this dot right here with my stiletto, so I can grab my marking tool. I'm going to try using my vinyl marker for this. And I'm going to mark in that hole, so I have a dot. And then I'm just going to kind of lift up the side of my pattern paper and mark the two outer dashed lines, just right along the edge so I can see. It's going to go from this dot to these corners, okay? So once I lift it up, I'm going to take my small ruler and I'm going to line up my ruler with that dot in the middle and then out towards one of the edge marks, and I'm just going to draw a line. Just like that. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. So from the dot to that outer edge mark. There you go. You could also just cut this little triangle out of the pattern piece and then just trace like that if you'd like. I like to be able to use these pattern pieces over and over again, so I didn't want to cut it out because then it'd be hard to trace it. Another thing you could do is just print this one twice, so that way you have one that doesn't have the cutout and one that does, but this is another option. So for the other piece, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to flip over the pattern piece and we're going to work from the back side. So make sure you mark on the back side where you need to mark the seam placements. There we go. Now we have our darts marked. So what we want to do is take our panels and fold them right sides together, and you're going to match up the lines that you just marked, so the edge to the edge. If it makes it easier, what you could also do is just cut a teeny tiny little snip right along these edges, just like that. So right where we marked along the raw edge, you can cut itty bitty tiny triangles, and that way when you fold this right sides together, you can see it a little bit easier. So fold it together, and then I'm going to use clips, and as you fold along the center of your panel, it should fold right along the middle of those lines and come to that dot that you marked. So now you have like half of the triangle. Do the same thing with the other panel. Okay, so now we're just going to sew along those marked lines. So pick a side, either side, it doesn't matter. You just want to make sure you have the full line, and you're going to sew right along it. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. If you're using a thick vinyl, for example, this is like a thick to medium weight vinyl, I do suggest that you do a second row of stitching just outside, so just closer towards the fold from the first line, because you can see it does pull right here, and if it pushes too hard, you're going to see the stitches. All right, once you have those stitched, you're going to push out. So you're going to push the corner of the pleat out like that, so it kind of pops out. And this is a good time to try it. Push on it, and just, you don't have to push terribly hard, but just kind of push on it and stretch it. And if you can very easily see the stitching because your material is thick, just go back in there and then stitch just right to the right towards the fold. One more row of stitching right next to the stitching you already did, and that should prevent that from happening. So I'm gonna push both these out. Oh, this is gonna look so cute. And these give that bag the really nice, like, pushed out, puckered effect, and so it's not completely flat, you know? Okay, so set those to the side, and let's repeat that process for the front panel lining, panel D. So I'm going to flip this over to the back. Once again, I've already taken my stiletto and I've punched little holes through the circle marks right here. Now I'm just going to lay this pattern piece over my panel, and then I'm going to take my marking tool, I'm going to mark the dot, and I'm going to lift up the edge and mark the edge of my material. Do this for both sides. All right, once again, I'll grab my ruler and line up from the dot to the raw edge mark so I can create that stitch line. Once you have those done, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to fold the material right sides together. So again, we're still looking at the wrong side. And line up the edge marks. And then just clip to hold it in place. And then fold that dart. Do the same thing with the other side. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew along both of these marked lines to create those cute darts for the lining. All right, and this time the darts are just going to be kept in like that because it'll go like this, see? So you can just leave that. So you can set this lining to the side and keep your exterior pieces. And then grab your front pocket. This is when it starts getting cute because you can see you just kind of pop it next to each other. How sweet is that? So sweet. All right, so let's attach these. So I'm gonna move my zipper to the middle so I don't accidentally hit it. I'm gonna take my left panel, and the longer side of your side panels are what goes against the middle pocket. I'm gonna lay it right side down. And you can see it's a little tricky because this is now 3-dimensional, right? And somewhat our middle pocket is still 2-dimensional. So I'm gonna start at the top edge of my zipper tape and clip these corners together. It's possible that your center pocket will be taller than the sides, and if you have to trim anything down, you wanna trim the bottom edge down. So we're just gonna clip right along this edge, and as you can see, as I'm clipping it, my side panel just starts kind of going straight up. So that's when you pick it up and look at it from the top. You don't want to curve your center panel. You don't want to get that all curvy. You want to try to keep your center panel straight and let the side panel just wobble around wherever it needs to go. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that with the other side. Once again, on the right side, I'm going to flip it right sides together. Starting at the top of my zipper tape, I'm going to line up the corners and then clip down towards the bottom corner. And now we're going to sew along these 2 clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You might notice I'm going to be using my zipper foot a lot because we have these curves. It's just easier to get in here with the zipper foot than it is with a regular presser foot. So now I'll just fold the side panels down. And this is a little tricky because if you try to fold it like this, you see they kind of pinch in because it's not flat. So we're going to top stitch right along the side edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If it's easier, instead of flipping it out like this, flip the sides in so you can get in there and get it nice and flat. Okay, now pop it out. Oh yeah, that is cute, isn't it? Oh, I love it. Okay, so now you can grab your little scrap of material if you want to include that little D-ring. Like I said, I like to include it because I put hand sanitizer there, but you can definitely skip this. If you're going to do it, work on the back side of your small piece, and you can just draw a midpoint line going along the long edge. So for me, that's 3/4 of an inch up from the raw edges. And we're just gonna fold these in on themselves, wrong sides together. And I am going to top stitch along these edges just because my vinyl is a little bit thicker. If you have quilt cotton or even waterproof canvas, you can just iron this and it will stay pretty well because it's pretty small. But since I have vinyl, I'm going to top stitch it. So now I'm just gonna top stitch along both of these long edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take your D-ring, slide your strap so that the wrong side is going against the flat side, and fold your strap wrong sides together. And it's just so cute. So now we're just going to stitch right along the raw edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now grab your front panel and decide which side you want this to go on. It's gonna go on one of the exterior side flaps, so think about it when you're wearing it, where you want it to go. I think this time I'm gonna put it over here on what will be the left side when it's being worn. Yeah, we'll do it over here. So I'm putting mine about a 1/2 of an inch to the right of the seam. And remember that 1/4 inch stitch line you just made? That stitch line needs to match up with the top raw edge of your panel. So your tab is gonna overhang the top raw edge of the panel by about a 1/4 of an inch. So it's like that stitch line we just made was mostly like a mark. So we know where to put this. Okay, now let's stitch this down at a 1/4 of an inch from the top raw edge. So this is gonna be pretty much like a 1/2 of an inch away from the top raw edge of your little tab. All right, go ahead and set this to the side. Now we're gonna grab pattern piece E. So now what you wanna do is turn this over and you wanna just mark a line going down the midpoint or use a ruler. You wanna cut this entire panel in half so we have 2 pieces. Now once you have both of these, let's just go ahead and mark the midpoints along the long edges on each one of them, top and bottom midpoints. We're gonna be saying mark the midpoint a lot today. So if you wanna play a game where you have to do something every time I say it, good luck. I suggest jumping jacks. I suggest you do jumping jacks every time you hear me say mark the midpoints, or maybe a squat. Okay, you can take one of these and put it to the side. Now grab your main panel, and remember we did mark the midpoint already on this top edge. So we're gonna lay our main panel right side up, then take one of your strips and lay it right side down, matching up the midpoints first. Because this is curved, we have to use midpoints. So I clip at the midpoint and then I clip out towards the edge. And our goal is that it goes all the way to the corner. So just work inch by inch on this. And it's really going to depend on the thickness of your material, how easy or difficult this is. The more lightweight your material, the more easy this will be. When I was using the thicker material, what I did was I marked the midpoint first, and then I marked the corners, lined all that up, and then I marked in between those 3 clips. All right, so now we're going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I do suggest you use a zipper foot for this. Alright, once you have that stitched on, let's trim down the seam allowance just a little bit. It says to trim it down to 1/4 inch. You will have to trim down some of this little tab right here. As you can see, I did an extra row of stitching, so I'm not trimming down that extra row. But we do have a bit of a tight fit, so we do need to trim down the seam allowance just a bit. And I am trimming down some of the zipper tape as well. Once you have that cleaned up, we're going to flip this top strip up, and we're going to top stitch right along it at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Alright, this is looking so cute. So now we're going to attach the main zipper up top. So just like before, I'm going to kind of measure out my zipper tape by eyeballing this. Remember, this is like a curved surface. It's not straight, so you don't want it to be too short. So once again, just longer than it needs to be. And I'm going to put my zipper pull on. Alright, and even though my zipper tape is longer than it needs to be, I am still going to mark midpoints because it's going to make it easier to install everything else. So I'm just going to fold my zipper tape in half and find the middle and use scissors and make a teeny tiny clip. You could also just use some marking tool if you like. You don't have to use scissors here. Just make sure you mark the midpoint on the top and the bottom of your zipper tape. There we go. So now just like down here, when the zipper closes, I want it going towards the left, so I make sure I have it lined up like that. And then I'm going to take my zipper tape and lay it right side down with the right side of that strip facing up. And I'm going to match up the midpoint marks, clip those together, and then just clip out towards the side. I'm going to base this on at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So now grab your lining piece that has the darts, and you're going to lay this right side down against the back side of your zipper tape that you just basted on. You know what? We need to mark the midpoint. So go ahead and mark the midpoint along the top edge, and you can also do the bottom edge of this lining piece. All right, now we're gonna lay this right side down against the right side of the exterior, the back side of the zipper tape, and line up those midpoints along the top edge, clip in place, and then you can line up the edges. So I'm looking at the edge of my exterior panel, and then the top corner edge of my lining, lining that up. Do the same thing over here on the right side. If you cut your zipper to the size suggested, then you're just gonna go all the way to the edge of the zipper tape. Once again, mine is longer than it needs to be. Now just clip along these edges to hold it all together. Now I'm going to stitch along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, once those are stitched together, let's flip the lining and the exterior. They are wrong sides together. Yeah. That's cute, isn't it? I know, it is. So I'm going to match up the bottom edges and clip those together. And I'm also going to go over here on the side. So what I'm trying to do is flatten the seam right next to the zipper, so I have a nice clean top stitch. Once again, depending on your material, you could use an iron to flatten it out. That's the ideal situation, but since I have this vinyl, I can't do that. And I'm clipping the darts together, and I'm just flipping the seams in opposite directions as I do that, so I don't have too much bulk right there. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and just top stitch right along this edge next to the zipper teeth. Alrighty, once you have that top stitch, now just flip this over and line up all of the raw edges between the exterior and the lining and clip together. Now let's take this to the machine and just baste along the raw edges in the bottom corner, everything like that, at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So as I basted this, I did stitch over the closed side, so this side will always be closed. It doesn't open on this side over here of the zipper tape. I did stitch over that to hold in place, but I didn't do it on the open side because we're gonna switch up just a tiny thing when we attach the flap. So now grab your exterior top panel F and the remaining strip you have. So first thing you wanna do is take your panel F and mark the midpoints along the top of the little curve and also the straighter section. So then lay your top panel F right side up so that the curved part is on top, and then take your strip and we're gonna lay them right sides together, matching up those midpoints. So line up the midpoints, clip together at the midpoints. Always like to clip just around it as well. And then on the left side, we're gonna curve this down and we're gonna clip it to the top corner of our top panel. Just get it lined up and clip together. And same thing on the right side, clip these together. And then it's easier if you just flip this around and kind of tuck in that top panel like a bowl, keeping the strip straight. So the more lightweight your material is, honestly, the more difficult this is going to be. Thicker and sturdier your material is, the less fighting you're gonna have to do. It's just gonna kind of tuck in exactly like it needs to be. But when you've got lightweight material, it's more willy-nilly, and you have to play with it a little bit more so you avoid the pleats. All right, so once you have this clipped together, we're gonna sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Again, like I said, this is hard because it is such lightweight material, but it is supposed to be bowl-like. When we sew this, we're gonna sew with the strip wrong side up and just go along. And if you find that the strip and the top panel are separating, that's when you grab your scissors and you make the teeniest, tiniest little clip into the raw edge of the straight panel so it can spread out a little bit as it goes around. Once you have it stitched down, let's just trim the seam allowance down. I'm just gonna trim it in half. And then you're gonna flip this out, and the pattern says press the seam towards the zipper strip, which is this like straight strip right here. Press it towards that strip. Now, if you're using quilt cotton, go ahead and grab your iron and do that. It's gonna naturally do that anyways. I'm going to top stitch along the strip at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to keep that seam against it. It can be a little tricky, and the pattern doesn't suggest it, but I'm gonna do it. All right, there we go. And I can tell you this already is a lot easier than it was with the other material. The thickness of your material is really going to determine how easy or difficult this is. So, I've got that ready to go. Now grab your main panel, and if your zipper tape is still long like mine is, let's trim that down, get it to the same length. So you can see over here on the left side, my zipper tape has opened and separated. I'm okay with that because that is going to be how I top stitch it in the end. I'm gonna need it to be separated in order to do that. So I'm okay with that. So we're going to take our top panel and lay it right side down, and we're working on the zipper strip edge. So not this edge where you think it will be easier, not that one, the curvy edge, we're gonna work on that one. So match up the midpoint with the top edge of your zipper tape and that zipper strip edge of your top panel. We're laying them right sides together. And then mark the corners, and then clip at the corners on both sides. And again, if you're using thick material, having this zipper be able to open like this is going to make this part much easier. More lightweight material, you really don't need the zipper to open, because you can kind of just mush everything out of the way. But this time, my zipper strip is going to be tucked in like a bowl, and the zipper tape is going to stay straight along the edge. These aren't really sharp curves, so they shouldn't give you too much trouble. All right, I'm gonna baste this on at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So if you're impatient like me, you're probably doing this right now. And that looks so cute, doesn't it? All right, so now let's grab the lining piece. This is gonna be pattern piece G flip over your front panel so you're looking at the lining side and the back of the zipper tape. This is when it all starts getting pretty hairy, guys, because everything is curving in different directions, which is why I find it easier to kind of open the zipper, separate the ends. Don't let it fly off the end. Stitch over here so that doesn't happen. But I find it's just a little bit easier to do it this way. So now take your lining top panel and let's mark the midpoints on the top and the bottom of the long edges. Now, looking at the back of your zipper tape, find the midpoint on there. Take your lining top panel and lay it right side down against the back of the zipper tape and clip these together at the midpoint. And then let's go over towards the edge on the corner on the right side and clip together. And then over towards the left side at that corner and clip together. And then just clip right along the zipper. I know it's tricky. If the lining pleats, I'm not that worried about it. Alright, so now we're going to go take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew with the exterior right side up, and we're going to stitch at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're using a zipper foot and you back stitch at the beginning and the end. Don't let this zipper fall off. For me, it's easier to be able to separate it like this, so that's what I'm going to do. So once you have that stitched together, you can pull the top, exterior, and lining panels wrong sides together. And now the pattern doesn't suggest top stitching here, but I'm going to. So I'm going to line up the open edges over here and the midpoint of my lining and my exterior and just clip them together. So if you have your zipper tape closed over here on the open end, then top stitching this is probably not going to be an option. But if you have it open, you can kind of pull and flatten this out. If you have an iron, go ahead and press it. I find it's kind of easier if I just pull up on the front panel like this. And I'm just going to go slowly working along this edge to get a nice smooth line and top stitch just 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. So doing all that top stitching is just my personal preference. It really helps if you're using vinyl because the pattern suggests ironing a lot with the tip of the iron to create this, structured look. But if you have vinyl, it's not going to work. So using the top stitching helped me. So what I'm going to do now before I continue is just line up my open edges over here. And I actually do that by getting the zipper close, but don't let it go off. And I'm going to just top stitch right over the edge here within 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to hold these ends together because now I do need it all to stay together. All right, so if you haven't already done so, align these top raw edges of the top panel. Remember they're wrong sides together. There we go, just clip them. And now let's stitch along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is looking so good. So now grab your 2 exterior strap connectors. These are pattern pieces H. And we're going to attach them with the longer curved side to the front just like that. Oh, that looks cute. That looks cute. Okay, so again, we have, a curved surface. So we're going to just lay these right sides together. So right side of connector to the right side of the exterior. And I'm going to start with the top corner. I'm going to clip at the top corner together. I'm going to go down to the bottom corner where we have this little, turn here. And I'm going to clip. If you need to push this inwards, do that. I'm going to clip this on that corner. It should all line up pretty well. Don't worry about the middle just yet. Just use clips to hold all these things together. And now I'm just going to kind of push this like that and spread it out as I need to get this to line up just right. There we go. So I'm going to do this on the other side as well. Again, I'm going to tuck this the opposite direction like a bowl. And I'm going to take the right connector and lay it right sides together. Line up the top corner, clip together. Line up the bottom corner of the connector and then just this little turn here on the front panel. And clip those together. And then I just kind of push it and tuck it. You should be able to work this around so that it all lines up without any wrinkling or rippling or anything like that. So now I'm going to sew these together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now flip this over so you're looking at the lining side and grab your lining strap connectors, pattern piece I. And just like we did on the front, you're gonna take your two connectors and we're going to lay them right sides together along these curved edges. So just clip the top and bottom corners first and then clip the middle. And this time you're going to kind of push it the other way. This should be a little bit easier since the front is already stitched in place. I'm going to do this for both connectors. Alright, once you have those clipped in place, now I'm going to stitch these on at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end of each side. Alright, once you have these both stitched on, let's pop out the bag. And the connectors should be pulled wrong sides together just like that. Now remember, the lining connector should extend farther than the exterior. So if you are using quilt cotton, you can use an iron to flatten these out. Otherwise, just use your fingers. And I'm going to put clips along the side of the raw edges. Alright, once you've got it flattened out, now we're going to go top stitch along the connector edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do this for both sides. Oh, that's looking good, isn't it? Oh, that's looking good. So now, keeping the lining and exterior connectors clipped together, we're going to just baste along the top and the side and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance for both of these. Make sure the lining stays overextended though. What's so cool about this too is that this vinyl on the side and the center, it glows in the dark. So this is gonna look really cool. All right, you can go ahead and set this to the side. So now we're going to work on the zipper pockets for the back panel and also for the lining. Whenever you cut out your back panel, just make sure you remember that you're going to cut it a little bit shorter than the lining. It is marked on the pattern, but the lining extends farther on the sides here than the back panel. So let's start with the back panel. And you're going to need your back panel exterior and then 2 of your zipper pocket panels. So before we get started, make sure you mark the midpoints on the top and the bottom of all of your panels, your lining and your exterior back panels and all 4 of your zipper panels. And then on the back of one of your zipper panels, you're gonna mark a rectangle that is 1/2 of an inch high and 8 inches wide, and it's 1 inch down from the top edge of the zipper panel. Now take your back panel and lay it right side up. Take your zipper panel with the rectangle on it and lay it right side down and match up those midpoint marks at the top and clip together. And then just clip along this top edge. And now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along this 8-inch rectangle. Just make sure you put your needle down in the corner and that you pivot at each corner and backstitch at the beginning and the end. So once you have this sewn on, draw a midpoint mark going right along the center lengthwise of that rectangle, and then draw little triangles that reach out from the corners of the rectangle towards that center line. And then I'm going to grab a seam ripper and just start seam ripping through the pocket and the back exterior material right along that center line. Once you've got it started, you can then grab your scissors and cut along the center line until you get to the tip of one of those triangles, and then cut along the diagonal lines over to the corners of your rectangle. And your goal here is to get as close as possible to those corners without cutting the thread. I'll remind you, this pocket is completely optional. So if this is not a style of zip pocket that you're comfortable doing, you don't have to do it. Your bag will still be amazing without this pocket. There we go. So now we're going to take our panel and push it through that opening, and the sides and the top skinny bit as well. Push it all through. So now when you do this, I'm going to use an iron this time because I'm using this waterproof canvas. In the back side of the vinyl, I can do that. But what you want to do is press this all down as best you can. And when you're looking from the lining side, if you can see a little bit of the exterior vinyl peeking through, that's good. That means you won't see the lining side peeking through on the other side. So I'm going to start on this top edge first. I'm going to fold it up so that the exterior and the lining are wrong sides together. And you don't want the vinyl to poke through too much because we don't want to hit that with the iron. But I'm just going to take my iron and run it along this. Remember, I'm doing the right side of my waterproof canvas, so it can be ironed. That out of the way, and then as it cools with waterproof canvas, I like to just kind of hold it in place and it will cool pretty crisp. Now this is going to help with the waterproof canvas side, but not so much with the vinyl side. Vinyl doesn't really care about the iron. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom though, because a little bit, something's better than nothing. So now I'm gonna keep my iron over to the side because I'll need that again for the lining. So now I'm gonna grab some zipper tape and just cut it so it's longer than the window by quite a bit, by about an inch on each side, honestly. And I'm gonna add my zipper pull to this. And then I'm gonna grab my double-sided 1/4 inch tape and I'm going to line it up on the very raw edge of each long side of the zipper. So now with the zipper closing going towards the left, as always, the zipper when it's closing, it's gonna be going towards the left. That's how I want it. I'm gonna remove the paper from the top tape and I have my zipper laying right side up. I'm gonna take my panel here and I'm gonna have it so that the exterior is laying right side up. And I'm just gonna line this up to make sure that my zipper is for the most part lined up with my pocket. It's not too far to one edge or anything like that. And then I'm just going to place this over my zipper. And the nice thing about this tape is that it's not super sticky, so if I have to move stuff around, I can just lift it up and move it around. I'm gonna press it down. I'm gonna take out my zipper pull, and I'm gonna close my zipper all the way. And that helps get the zipper coils nice and straight. Now I'm gonna lift up the bottom of my exterior panel so I can see the zipper tape. And I'm gonna take the paper off of that bottom edge of the tape. And then I'm gonna fold this all back down and push down on the bottom edge. There we go. All right, so now my zipper is in there on the back. It looks just like this. Now I'm gonna top stitch around this rectangle on the back panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance going all the way around. I do like to back stitch over the zipper teeth as I go over each side. All right, once you have it top stitched on, flip this over so you're looking at the back of the panel. And then grab your remaining zipper pocket panel and lay it right side down, just matching it up with the pocket panel you already have. If it doesn't match up exactly, that's okay. When we create these types of little windows, sometimes the edges get sucked in a little bit. That's fine. But just do your best to clip this all around all the edges. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and you're gonna flip your material so you have the right side facing up at the back panel. You're gonna move it out of the way while you stitch at about a 3/8 inch seam allowance along all of the clipped edges. So you can see here that my two lining panels do not match up at all. That's fine. I'm just gonna measure 3/8 of an inch from the one that's smaller, all the way around. All right, once you have that done, if you wanna trim down some of the sides and the bottom, you definitely can. I'm actually not gonna trim the sides so much, but the bottom I will. We don't need all this extra overhang over here. And now just line up the top edge of your lining pocket with the top edge of the back panel. And we can just sew along this top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance to keep it all together. All right, you can set this to the side. So now we're gonna repeat all of that pretty much exactly for the lining pocket. However, this one is not optional. This is how you're gonna turn it all out. So just like before, make sure you mark the midpoints on the 2 zipper pockets and the lining main panel. Take your lining main panel and lay it right side up. Make sure you have that 8 inch by 1/2 inch rectangle marked on the back of one of your zipper pocket panels. And then laying the zipper pocket panel that has the rectangle marked on the back, right side down against the right side of the lining main panel, match up the midpoints and clip along the top edge. And now let's go sew along that 1/2 inch by 8 inch rectangle along the outside edges, making sure you pivot your needle at each corner. Once you have that sewn on, grab a seam ripper and rip right along that midpoint line. So you should have that long midpoint line and then the triangles on the end, just like we did on the back panel. And then grab your scissors and cut along that midpoint line until you get to the tip of the triangle for the corners and cut off towards the very corners of the rectangle, doing your best to get close but not cut the threads. Do this for both sides. Now we're going to flip this through to the back side of the lining so that our zipper pocket panel and our lining panel are wrong sides together. And let's once again grab the iron and carefully iron right along these edges. So I always like to start with the top edge first. And since both my panels are waterproof canvas, this will stay nice and flat. So then I'm gonna roll the bottom edge here, get that as straight as possible. And I'm just using a dry iron, no steam right now. And then I just like to kind of smooth it down with my hands as it cools off, and then it's nice and flat. So this one I can iron on the front as well. If you've got some puckering or anything, I wouldn't worry about it, especially since this is the lining. It's something you want to be more careful of with the exterior, but with lining, I think it's fine. Just have a little bit of puckering. And once again, for the last zipper, I'm going to just lay my zipper tape out over my window for the pocket and just cut it so that it's bigger than that window. Then I'll grab my last zipper pull and insert it onto my zipper tape. There we go. And then I'm going to attach my double-sided tape along the long edges of my zipper tape. And I'm gonna have my zipper facing up, and when the zipper is closed, it's gonna be going towards the left. And then I'm just gonna remove the paper from the top edge of the tape, take my lining panel, make sure that the zipper extends past the window on each side, and just lay my lining panel right side up on top of it. There we go. And then I'll close the zipper all the way so I can get this zipper teeth nice and straight. Pull back the panels and remove the paper from the bottom edge, and then just press this back down. And this is much easier to do with waterproof canvas than it is with vinyl. So now I'm going to top stitch around all 4 edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alright, once that's stitched on, lay the lining panel wrong side up, so you're looking at the back of the zipper, and you're going to take your last lining panel, pocket panel, and you're going to lay it right side down. At this time we're going to stitch it together, but not completely, because this is how we're going to turn the whole pouch out in the end. So we want to make sure we leave a hole here. So I am lining up the top edge and the sides, clipping all that together. Remember, just like before, if they don't line up exactly, that's okay. Now this time we're just going to stitch along the sides and the top, but we're going to leave the diagonal part and the bottom completely open. So I'm going to go all the way off the edge. You can stop about 3/8 of an inch from each diagonal if you want. I'm just going to go all the way off the edge on the sides, and then I'm going to stitch on the top and on the other side, and back stitch really well over here where you start and stop your stitching. I'm going to do all this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then once you're done, you should have that opening in your lining, and then just stitch a 1/4 inch so that you're attaching the pocket panels to the top of the lining panel right here at the top. All right, so everything's pretty much ready to go. We haven't built the strap yet. We will do that in just a moment. So first things first, let's grab your front panel, and we're going to push it just like this. And before we get started, let's make sure that main zipper on the front panel is like halfway in. Same with the zipper. The zipper on the lining panel right here, the one we just did that has the hole in the bottom, let's make that all the way open. So now let's just tuck our front panel like this and flip it over so we're looking at the lining side of it. Let's take your main back panel and lay that right side up, and then we're going to take our main front panel and lay it right side down. And we want to line up the edges, but not the edge of the lining, just the edge of the exterior. So you might want to flip this over, actually it might be easier. So we're going to take the back panel and line it up with the edge of the front panel exterior. You see that lining overhangs, it's supposed to. Same thing on the other side, lining up the edges of exterior material, not lining material. Okay, now let's clip the midpoint marks on the top edges together, exterior and back panel. And now find the midpoint marks on the bottom edges and clip those together. And what we're most concerned with right now is this top edge. So I like to get everything kind of straight before I start sewing it together. But let's just clip along this top straight edge here. Now I'm going to sew this with the front panel because it's like a mountain with this part lining side up. And I'm actually going to stitch along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is different than the pattern, but I find that it's the best way to hide the stitches in the end. So I'm going to stitch along this top straight edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, once you have that one done, now we're going to clip the rest of the bag together. So if you haven't already, make sure that the sides are lined up. Line up the midpoint marks on the bottom. It might be easier to do this from the back of the back panel. And just get them all lined up and clipped together. I like to get this pocket out of the way, so I'm just going to fold it up and clip it to the top edge. And everything should line up pretty easily. You shouldn't really have too much stretch going on. Now it's going to depend on what material you're using. Cool cotton has a tendency to stretch. Same with cotton canvas. Now we're going to sew along the bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can do a 3/8 inch seam allowance if you want, but I found that my stitches were showing when I did that before. So I'm gonna do 3/8 of an inch stitching when I put the lining on, which will also tuck in the exterior. But for here, I'm gonna do 1/4 inch seam allowance. You are not stitching over this right here, okay? This, you have to be able to put your finger between the two exterior materials, okay? That has to stay open for the strap. We're just going along the bottom edge all the way. So I backstitch at the beginning and the end of this. All right, so once you have this stitched down, lay your main body here, lining side up, and then grab your back panel lining and make sure this zipper is open. And we have a hole here, okay? That's important. You can keep this all the way open over here for the main zipper, or you can just keep it halfway open, whichever one's easier for you. But then take your lining back panel and lay it right side down against the right side of your main panel here. And let's just work on the top edge first. So I clipped this pocket out of the way, so I'm gonna put that back down, just like that. I'm gonna match the midpoints on my lining back panel with the midpoint on my main unit here. And now, once I get the midpoint marked, I'm gonna go all the way out to the edge. I'm gonna match up the linings here. So remember on the other side, we matched up these exteriors. Now we're gonna match up the lining pieces. And the lining pieces are a little bit longer than the exterior pieces. So clip those together on the corners. And then just clip along this top edge to hold it all together. We're only worried about this top edge right now. All right, so now I'm gonna sew along this top clipped edge, this time at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Remember on the other side, I was sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm gonna sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now, once that's stitched on, let's take these pockets. So I have pockets on both sides here. I'm gonna clip them both up, but especially the lining pocket, because that's how we're gonna turn it all out. So just clip them up and out of the way, and then smoosh down the main part of your lining here so you can pull down that back panel and line it up with the midpoints. And depending on your material, this might be a little challenging. I know with the thicker vinyl, it can be kind of a wrestling match right now. Just, you gotta kind of like empanada it up. You know, like have you had an empanada? They're delicious. It kind of reminds me of that. Just gotta smush it all in there. Make sure you line up the bottom corners here. That shouldn't be hard if you already lined up the top corners and those are sewn together. Just go all the way around, clipping it in place. Straighten out any bubbles. You don't need any ripples anywhere. All right, once you've got it all clipped in place, let's sew along this bottom edge here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once that is sewn, let's work on this bottom seam right here. I'm just gonna cut the seam in half. Just gently going along this bottom edge to reduce the bulk. Make sure those pockets are still out of the way. We're not cutting those pockets, okay? And then I'm gonna cut into the curved bits, just little tiny snips about halfway through the seam allowance that's remaining. And that's just gonna help these little curvy bits kind of spread out, and they won't look so rigid. So now you're gonna turn the pouch out through this hole in the lining, but we just want the lining to be out. We're not gonna turn it perfectly out first. We're gonna just turn it out so the lining is facing out. So this can be difficult or challenging depending on what material you're using. If you need to, grab your turning tool so that you can get in here and just kind of poke out these side open bits. Remember, we haven't done the strap yet. We still have to do that. But you want to get those as straight as possible. All right, so here's the waist bag turned out with the lining. And you can pull out the pocket as well, because we're going to need to get in there. So now let's put this to the side while we build our strap. So here are all my bits for my strap. I have my buckle, my slider, and my 2 cuts of webbing. Now, the size of your webbing is going to be dependent on how you want to wear it. For me, the cuts in the pattern, which is 9 inches and 33 inches long, it makes it a little bit too big to go around my waist, but I am actually going to be wearing this as a crossbody instead of a waist bag. And if you're going to be wearing this as a around the waist bag, I do suggest you use a cotton webbing not a nylon webbing, because this is kind of slippery. A cotton webbing is going to be a little bit chunkier, and it's going to kind of just hold on to you a little bit better. But again, I'm going to be using mine as a crossbody, so the nylon webbing will work great. It is just a little bit more loose. So the first thing I always like to do when I'm using nylon webbing is to melt the raw edges, because this stuff likes to fray so much. So you melt those edges to prevent that. So do this for all of your raw edges. Now we're going to start with the shorter strap and open your buckle, and you're going to take the receiving end of the buckle and lay it wrong side up if you have a wrong side. Mine's kind of curved, so wrong side up. And then take the end of your shorter part of the strap and then just pull it over. You can fold it over by about 2 inches. I'm actually going to just double fold it. And let's see, you don't have to be terribly precise with this. So if you don't have to get a ruler out and make sure it's exactly this or that. But let's see, I'm folding it over by about 3/4 of an inch. So I have it folded under about 3/4 of an inch, fold it over. There we go. And now I'm actually going to sew this and rivet it. I really don't like sewing these because I can never get a straight box, but I'm gonna do my best. So I'm gonna go to the sewing machine. I'm just gonna sew a little box going around the fold over area to hold this in place, and then I'm also gonna add a rivet. Okay, that actually looks pretty good, but you can't even see the stitching because of the busy print, so that's fine. I'm gonna add a rivet to this real quick. So I've got a hole punch and a rivet press, and then I'm gonna grab my rivets. And I'm just gonna punch a hole right in the center of that rectangle I just sewed. And then I grab a rivet and just push it through that hole. If you'd like, you can melt down these little frayed edges around that hole. I know it gets kind of messy. It's like a little fuzzball here. But what you can do is kind of pull everything out of the way and just melt down those raw edges. Try not to burn the thread you just stitched in place. You don't want to melt that. But then insert your rivet, push it through, grab the rivet press and press into place. There we go. All right, so the short end is done. Now let's work on the longer end. So for the longer end, what we want to do is first attach it to the slider. So take one edge, put it over the bar of the slider. You can pull it down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever you're comfortable with. But for me, what I want to do is fold it over. There we go. And with the slider, it's a little bit harder to stitch because it wants to get in your way. So we're gonna give ourselves some grace here and not be too picky about that. So I'm just gonna clip this to hold it. There we go. And now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch, again, a little rectangle to hold down that folded over bit. When I stitch it down, I pull the slider away like that. So the bar area that's on the bottom here, you take that and pull it away so that you can get as close as possible to the bar over here without hitting it. And a zipper foot is always helpful for this. And then once again, I'm going to install a rivet right in the center of that rectangle. Okay, so this part gets a little confusing sometimes. So lay your long strap with the folded over edge facing up, and then grab the pronged presser section of the buckle, and we're going to insert it so that the right side of it is on the bottom here, so it's pointing down. Now this gets a little tricky, so I'm just going to pull it through like that, insert the raw edge of the strap through the slider on the side where the fold over is, up and over that middle bar. And what you want to do is just test this out. Okay, so if this is on the bag and it goes like this, see, it goes like this, just want to make sure it's the right way. Oh, I think it's upside down. So I'll just show you what I'm kind of testing out. I put both of my straps upside down. So upside down, upside down. And then I curve it around like this to just try to see what it's going to look like. And my buckle can buckle like this, but both parts of my buckle have a curve to them. And it looks like, yeah, the curve on the pronged side is upside down. So I need to take it off and flip it around. This is just personal preference. There are a lot of buckles out there that are straight, so it won't even matter. So what I'm going to do is take this off like that, flip it around 180 degrees, reinsert it, and try again. Always take the time. This is something that I'm picky about because these buckles have a curve to them to curve around your belly, you know? So like I want it to be right. So it's just something I'm picky about. If you're not picky about it, then just, it works. Doesn't matter which way it buckles, it works. But take the time, if it is something that you're picky about, take the time to make sure it's right. So I'm gonna flip it over. I'm gonna flip over the short one. So this would be like the front of the bag, and then this is your back here. So I'm just gonna take them and wrap them up like this. Oh yeah, now we have that nice curve of our buckle. Perfect. So that's exactly the way it needs to be before we install it. So now grab your pouch and flip it over so you're looking at the front panel, the back of the front panel. Open up that zipper all the way. So this is the back of the front. Now we're gonna take the long section of the strap and we're going to put it in right side facing up. So your slider should tell you which is the right side, right? Slider, right side facing up. Take the raw edge of your strap, not the buckle part, the raw edge. Put the whole thing in the pouch and then slide it through the opening on the right side. So as you push it through, see how it just comes out? Now, this opening is about 1 1/4 inch wide. My strap is only 1 inch wide. It still works, so don't worry about that. So now, kind of poke out the corners of this opening to make sure it's nice and flat, nothing is folded in on itself. And you want the webbing that you're using to overhang about 1/4 inch. You can eyeball it or measure it, it's up to you. I'm gonna make sure mine's centered, since again, mine's not the same width as the opening, which is fine. And I'm going to clip this in place, keeping it as flat as possible. All right, you see this little lining stitch line right here? We're going to sew 1/4 inch in from that. So 1/4 inch to the left of that. We're gonna sew it really well, back stitching at the beginning and the end, or just 1 inch away from the edge of the lining, not the edge of the webbing, the edge of the lining, but we want it to go like here. We want it to go right here, right along the edge of the ruler. That's where we're gonna sew. If you want, grab a ruler and draw a line and then just sew over that line. And you might have noticed I did 2 rows of stitching because I can be pretty rough on these waist bags and I wanna make sure it doesn't end up coming out at any point. So now, gently kind of push down your lining material so you see more of the strap. And then we're gonna cut the strap down by just a bit. So we're just gonna cut off about 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the webbing only, not your lining. So make sure the lining's out of the way. And the point of this is because we're going to hide these raw edges now. So when you open up your lining again, your lining should overextend your webbing. So now let's take the short strap and we're gonna insert it right side facing up into the left side. So make sure everything else is out of the way. Gently, right side facing up, insert it through the opening over here on the left and let it overhang by about 1/4 inch. Again, if your webbing is a little bit more narrow than the opening, just make sure it's centered to the best of your ability. You will be surprised how much you can get away with here. There we go. So let's clip this together. And then once again, we're going to sew 1/4 inch in from the stitch line we have here on the lining, or 1 inch away from the raw edge of the lining, not the webbing, the raw edge of the lining. And then I'm gonna do 2 rows of stitches just to make sure there's a lot of security here. And just like we did on the other side, gently, because these are raw edges of your lining, they can start fraying, become a mess. Gently pull down the lining and cut off about 1/2 inch of your webbing. There we go. And before we move on, what we should do is we should burn the edges of our webbing if you're using a nylon or polyester webbing, because the webbing can start to fray over time, and that could end up having it kind of unravel from the bag, which would be tragic. Let's gently pull the lining down, and we're just melting the edges of our webbing, not our lining. Okay, now we need to close off the raw edges of these corners here. So what you're gonna do is just kind of stick your fingers in there and fold them down. And if you do this and you realize your webbing is still a little bit too long, you can always pull it back some more, trim it down some more. Just, again, make sure you melt the edges if you do that. My webbing over here on the right is a little too long still. And you can see the more you mess with the lining, the more unraveling you're gonna have here. This waterproof canvas is great, but if you're using like a quilt cotton, it's gonna get kind of messy. So you're gonna fold in the lining on itself. So you're tucking in those raw edges. And just take some finagling. But ideally, what you're trying to do is get those raw edges in so that the top edge of your lining is just a nice clean fold over, and it extends just a scotch past your webbing. So when we close it, we don't see any raw edge of the webbing, we don't see any raw edges of our lining. Just take your time here. It's a simple thing to do, but it can be a little frustrating if you're getting anxious with it. So do the same thing on the other side. Okay, it doesn't have to be beautiful. This is not something that's noticeable. You just don't want it to be a fraying raw edge. There we go. All right, so now I'm just gonna stitch right along the edge of these at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm gonna back stitch at the beginning and the end just to make sure everything is nice and tight and closed in and just polished. Okay, and one thing I like to do before I move on, because I have a lot of stitches here, I have a lot of like little tiny tails of thread, and those just kind of bug me. So because I'm using a polyester thread, what I can do is just gently boop them. I'm just booping those little tails. And what that does is just has them kind of suck in on themselves so that you don't have these little spikes everywhere. You do need to be careful though that you don't accidentally burn your fabric, because if you hold the light too close to the fabric, you'll have black marks. Okay, so that's in there. We're gonna just hope that that's good, because now we're gonna close the lining. So pull your lining pocket out of your zipper pocket. And this is a nice big opening. And pretty much what we're gonna do is we're just gonna fold down all these edges by about 1/4 of an inch. So what I do is I just start on one side and I'm just gonna fold it down. I'm not measuring how far I'm folding it. I'm just gonna fold down these little corners here. So I'm folding them down wrong sides together. And then I'm gonna fold down the long edge just like this. Again, I'm not measuring. And then when I go to the other side, what I do is I fold it down, wrong sides together. But what I'm doing now is making sure it matches up with the side I already folded down and just clipping them together. And then for the long edge, same thing. I'm just gonna fold the whole thing down, tucking in those raw edges, and then just making sure it meets up with the other pocket panel. There we go. So I've got the edges matched up, everything is folded in, no raw edges here. Now I'm just gonna top stitch around this entire clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, let's turn it out and hope it all worked out. So we're gonna tuck in that lining pocket, push down those corners. There we go. Close that zipper. Now we're gonna turn the whole bag out through the main zipper. Gentle, gentle. Okay, and now with these over here, you're gonna gently kind of tug on your strap to get out the corners. If you have really thick vinyl, you might rip your strap trying to do that, so don't fight it. Just get it as much as you can out without destroying anything. This is where the turning tool comes in handy, because you wanna poke out these corners without ripping anything. And I know a lot of people love that purple thing, but that purple thing is pretty sharp. So I do not suggest a knife or a pencil or anything that can rip through your material. Even on this one, I'll usually use the blunt end to get in there, and then carefully I'll use the pointier end. Okay, let's just take a little look at this. Oh my word. This might be one of the prettiest things I've ever made. Look how stinking pretty that is. Okay, final step, totally optional, is adding a couple rivets over here on the side panels. If you don't want to add them, if you don't have a rivet press, you do not need to. This should be pretty secure. I don't think it needs it, but it is pretty, and it does help a little bit, so I'm going to add them. Okay, the pattern suggests that they come down 3/8 of an inch from this seam right here, and then they're 3/4 of an inch separated, but again, because my strap is 1 inch wide, I'm gonna have mine 1/2 of an inch separated. So I have 2 dots here. They are 3/8 of an inch away from this edge over here, and then they're 1/2 of an inch separated, and I centered them on the webbing strap, because ideally we're going through the webbing. So now I'm gonna use those dots, and I'm just gonna make sure this is nice and flat. Keep an eye on the back, because we are going through the back panel as well. We're going through everything. And then just punch out those holes. And grab my rivets and set them in there. I think it's very cute. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. All right, once you have them all placed in there, now we just have to set them. Pushing down on our rivets. All right, let's see, wrap it around. Oh yeah, perfect. Wow, this bag is so cute. And this purpley vinyl here is perfect for this shape bag. I mean, It's so good. I think this might be the prettiest thing I've ever made. Okay, so here's the thing. I love that first version of the bag I made. I love the color blocking, I love the vinyl, but this is what you think of when you think, again, I'm sorry, of a fanny pack. It's what you think of, this squishiness of this vinyl. This is the most perfect material. Besides like a nylon, you know, windbreaker swishy material, which would also be perfect for this bag. This is like the most perfect material for a waist bag. I mean, it looks so good. And then adding in just a little bit of firmer vinyl right here and on the corners helps bring in the structure. Oh my goodness, guys. Oh, I hope you love making this as much as I do. This is such a cool bag. All right, let's try it on just to see what it looks like because it's fun. So here it is around the waist. Again, it's still, I use the same measurements, so it's still a little big around the waist, but I can always like pinch it back here, but that's as tight as it's gonna go. And then let's try it across the chest. Which honestly, when I'm out and about with the kids and stuff like that, this is how I wear it. It's just easier for me. I just put like my phone and all my basics in here, my wallet. Oh, and it looks just so cute, doesn't it? Oh, I love this bag so much. It is so fun to make. It is so fun to wear. You're gonna be so pleased with how it turns out. So if you make this bag, please let me know. I want to know how it goes. If you post a picture of it on social media, please make sure you tag me. I'm at OklaRoots. You can also send me an email. I'm jessica@oklaroots.com. I love seeing your versions. I think there's so many things you can do with this. There's so much fun material. I can't wait to see what you do with this. So thank you for sewing with me today. I hope that this inspires you to go out and make yourself a hipster bag, also known as a fanny pack. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.